Welcome to Detective Diaries, brought to you by Private Detectives Answer Investigation. If you are captivated by the art of deduction, the thrill of solving the unsolvable, or the enigmatic world of private investigation, you've just found your new favorite podcast. Detective Diaries is where secrets unravel and the truth is always a clue away. Presented by Private Detectives Answers Investigation, each episodes contain offbeat conversations about the real people involved in investigation.
This is Detective Diaries. I'm talking to you today in Metod, the town square in Ljubljana, Slovenia. As a private detective, I like to relate some of the stories of countries. Crime in Slovenia is slow, so a high-profile crime will stand out. Mention Ljubljana and people think of its stunning green capital status, a quiet, safe haven in Central Europe. Travel guides often highlight its low crime rates and recommend leaving your belongings unattended in a cafe. But every city, no matter how picturesque, has its shadows. Beneath the charming bridges and in the quiet apartment blocks, true crime has left its mark on Slovenia. I like living history and I enjoy talking and relating stories from the place I'm in. While here, I'm going to explore two very different cases of Slovenian criminal justice. The notorious chilling case of its only known serial killer, and, in part two, the story of a fraud that made headline news. We start in the late 1970s, a dark time for Slovenia when it was still a part of Yugoslavia. The name Metod Trobec became synonymous with fear. Trobec was a simple construction worker from a small village, but he harboured a monstrous secret. Between 1976 and 1978, at least 5 women disappeared after meeting him. A career criminal with a record dating back to 1967, he had notoriety for murdering 5 women in the homestead in Dolenja Vas, Polhovem. From 1976 to 1978, whose remains he burnt inside a stove. The brutality of the crimes led him to become one of the most infamous Slovenians in the country's history, with one website stating that he was more well-known than most politicians. The last convict to be sentenced to death in the country, his sentence was commuted and he spent the rest of his life in prison. Metod Trobec was born on the 6th of June 1948 in a small village. He and his twin sister Schrilla were born to an unnamed father and a mother named Metod Trebec. She had 2 other children from previous marriages. They lived on a farm without any running water, which was given to Trebec's mother during the land reform. According to his mother, Trebec began to walk at the age of 4 and could speak at the age of 5, but failed to achieve 7th grade and was unable to finish his primary school due to learning difficulties. Said that by the time he was 14 or 15 years old, Metod had burned down several haystacks, a statement his mother claimed was false. After completing his mandatory military service, Trobec went to work in West Germany, ostensibly because of the higher salaries, working there from 1971 to 1974, where he trained to be a motor mechanic. After returning to Slovenia, Trebec met and married a woman 21 years older than him. At his later trials, she claimed that her husband was always rude to her in their intimate life, appeared to be overly attached to his mother, and that Metod had also brought stolen items back to their home. The pair would separate and Trobec remarried another woman in 1978, although they divorced after only 9 months. His second ex-wife did not attend his later trials, despite a summons from the court. Around 1972, Metod Trebec purchased a homestead for 11 million dinar. She allegedly sold some of the family's cattle to pay for it, with some claiming that she received additional financial support, not only from her brother, but from Metod himself. She allowed Metod to move into the homestead with his first wife. He remained there until 1978, then for a brief period of time moved to another homestead, eventually returning. His mother eventually sold the place to a lodger who only cared about the upper floor and did not use the rooms on the first floor. Once the new owner learned what had been going on in there, as we will tell, he wrote to Trebec's lawyer demanding that the letter be read in court at one of Trebec's trials. Before Trebec gained notoriety for the subsequent murders, he had been charged with 6 different crimes and successfully prosecuted for them, additional charges being brought at his first murder trial. These past crimes set the scene for the travesties that Trebec later perpetrated. In 1967, he was convicted of aiding and abetting in the theft of a bicycle and a moped, not serious crimes, but the beginning. In 1971, he was convicted for theft, put on a month's probation, and in 1974, he received his first prison sentence, being in prison for a year for fraud and false accusations. These stem from an incident in which he hit a car he'd rented from West Germany, later found in an outbuilding somewhere, and had reported the theft to the authorities to collect a reward. The list of his crimes goes on. In 76, he was accused of stealing electricity, and in 77, which was shortly after, unknown at the time, he'd murdered Mahana Kanka, he used a key to rob a crafting cooperative and stole from them calculators, electric cookers, and various other accessories. A year later, in 1978, he got 3 months in prison for poaching, but the sentence was suspended. In 1979, while driving near a train station, he offered a ride to a pensioner who had just missed his bus. Trebec drove him to a meadow, threw him to the ground, and tore off his watch as the elderly man had no money on him. Later that year, while pretending to be a taxi driver, Trebec offered a ride to another elderly pensioner, his name Travanka. She wanted to visit Klena to visit her daughter. He drove her towards there and threw her out of the car without any luggage, her documents, or her money. Breaking this chronology for a moment, you may recall that Trebec had been imprisoned for a year in 1974. When he was in Roman prison, he was taken out and taken to the psychiatric hospital in Ljubljana. Here he had a psychiatric evaluation which determined that he had a psychosis and also a psychopathic personality for pretending to be a mental patient. He underwent electroconvulsive therapy. In the first instance, he was only given 3 shocks, and during the second, just 2. He reportedly threatened to kill his mother during a visit, but she would later downplay the incident and claim that they had argued about work on the farm. Concluding the backstory of Trebec's criminal and psychiatric history, Trebec was put under special supervision in 1980 at a hospital in Zagreb. He underwent further electroconvulsive therapy as he refused to cooperate. And so, of course, to the murders for which Trebec gained his notoriety. His modus operandi consisted of bringing out unfamiliar women to his homestead where he raped and strangled them. He savagely beat his victims until they were bleeding, and after killing them, he would shove the corpses into a masonry oven and set them alight with gasoline and firewood, throwing out the ashes of mainly human bones into a wooden urinal and a nearby septic tank. The victims' personal items and documents were either also burnt or brought back to the homestead. Investigators were unable to determine the exact reason why Trebec did not kill every woman he brought with him, but some speculated that he only targeted victims with health problems, as 2 of his victims had epilepsy. Despite this, officers investigating the homestead after his capture found patches of blood in several locations. In addition, they also found a novel called X100, which describes cold case murders and burning corpses, and another novel where they noted that Trebec had marked one sentence in bold: "I give all my secrets to the fire." During interrogations, Trebec gave 3 different accounts of what supposedly had transpired, initially claiming that the women were brought to him and then murdered by strangers. Later on, he claimed that he had given the victims some pills and that he participated in the murders before ultimately admitting that he strangled them during intercourse and that he burned the bodies in the oven. Contrary to what his defense attorneys had claimed, he never stated that his victims died of natural causes. The manner of death attributed to the victim's suffocation could not be proven with certainty at either of Trebec's trials. In the second trial, forensic experts were also unable to determine whether the murders had taken place during intimate intercourse or during rape. In the spring of 1976, Trebec met 18-year-old B.D. Mukovic, a retailer's apprentice at a bar in Ljubljana. He often took her on a ride with his motorcycle and drove to the homestead, where he severely beat her, raped her, and strangled her. White flip-flops, a piece of a dress, identification from documents, and a photograph were later found in Trebec's homestead. In March 1977, Trebec met 50-year-old pensioner and part-time cleaner Miana Kanka at a normal department store in Ljubljana. It is unclear what exactly transpired between the two of them, but it is presumed that she too was raped and killed at the homestead, probably that day or some day after. Her coat and a burnt gold chain were later found there, while other personal items were found at the homestead. Trebec would later use a key she had to rob the cooperative. On March 20th, 1976, 20-year-old Dolenja Gradcu, a bartender at an inn in Ljubljana, went missing near the Ljubljana train station while she was out on an errand for her mother. After failing to appear at work the following day, her mother reported her missing to the police station. Both authorities and concerned citizens began a large-scale search, both near the river and even abroad, but weren't able to find anything. It would later emerge that she'd been picked up by Trebec at the train station and driven back to the homestead where he killed her. Her keys to the back door to the inn's hallway and to the closet of a room would later be found at the crime scene. His fourth victim was 43-year-old alcoholic labourer Anna Flenig. She went missing sometime in the spring of 1978 at meeting Trebec at a restaurant in Ljubljana. All that is known about the case is that she was killed shortly after Gradcu, and some of her personal items were found after Trebec sold the homestead, while her clothes were later found hidden away in another location. His final victim was a 33-year-old housekeeper. She went missing on November 17th, 1978, while on her way to see a doctor. Unlike previous victims, she was an acquaintance of Trebec, the two of them having worked together at a manufacturing company in Ljubljana. Investigators had found the key to her apartment where she'd lived with her sister. Her furniture and coat were in possession of Trebec's sister, who lived in Kanga. A mandible found among the ashes of Trebec's masonry oven was identified by a forensic dental expert as belonging to Nicola after comparing the teeth to her dental records. By the end of July 1979, Trebec was definitely on the rampage. He met a German tourist named Hermann Lampano while the latter was searching for a place to stay. Under the pretense of going to visit his sister, Trebec drove off in the man's car. Lampano reported the theft to authorities, but went to search for him on his own and eventually found him again at the bus station in Kanga. Trebec promised that he'd give him the car back and a place to stay, then drove Lampano towards a forest. There, he beat him up, stole his wallet, which contained 200 Deutschmark, 2,000 Dinar, and his ID. Lampano had his clavicle broken and suffered wounds to his forehead. This attack was where things began to go wrong for Trebec. The attack was witnessed by a mushroom hunter. He took Lampano to a nearby phone booth and called the police. A few hours later, Trebec was stopped in Kanga by armed militiamen and transferred to a prison. After he was arrested, the militiaman went to investigate his home, where he found a plethora of various items Trebec had stolen, both from the Metalka warehouse and other places in Ljubljana, where they'd been working since June 1977. A total of 130 different stolen objects were found, reportedly amounting to around 130,000 dinar. Most concerning out of the discoveries, however, were bloodstains women's clothing, photos of which were taken and published in the newspapers. The acquaintances of then Trebec directed the authorities to his house. There they found burnt human remains, as well as clothing and identity papers. The officers suspected that the bodies had belonged to Kanka, to Plovnik and Likolic, since their items were there, but were initially unsure whether Trebec had killed them or not. A few months later, they linked the cases of Markovic and Brecko after finding remains and the detritus near a barn, as well as numerous articles of clothing, metal clothespins and gold chains with pendant shoes, handbags, umbrellas and cosmetic products. These objects were shown to relatives and the acquaintances of the victims, and all of them as positively identified as belonging to the missing women. In September 1980, the 5-member panel of the Kranko Regional Court sentenced Trebec to 8 years imprisonment for the attack on Lampano. Trebec told the president of the panel that he couldn't remember anything and blamed the electroshock therapy he'd received in 1974. The claim was rejected by a forensic expert. A month later, Trebec appeared before the Kranko Regional Court to stand trial for the 5 murders. At trial, he walked back on his previous confessions, claiming that he had been unable to think straight up until 2 or 3 years before. The next day, he waived his defence and stopped answering questions. Trebec claimed that the watch, which he'd stolen from Blanchik, he had in fact bought from a man in Ljubljana. When the judge read out the remaining indictments, mostly concerning robberies and thefts, and this including the attack on Trebanka, Trebec simply remarked that not everything was a sunshine in his life. On day 6 of Trebec's trial, a pensioner named Franz Prasch was also called to the stand. He was the one whose house Nikolic was cleaning at the time. According to him, she told him that she was dating a murderer, and upon hearing this, Trebec became angry, got up from the dock and shouted that he had been unfairly labelled a criminal and that his mother had raised him to be a decent, hard-working man. Other witnesses appeared, including Klebnich's son and Trebec's first wife. 5 forensic psychiatrists testified at the trial in regard to Trebec's sexual deviancy, all stating that he was neither mentally ill or understanding the gravity of his actions, and that he was not likely under the influence of alcohol when he killed his victims. On September the 24th, 1982, Trebec was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. Trebec remained silent when the verdict was read out. A year later, his lawyer submitted an appeal to the High Court of Ljubljana. From reviewing the arguments for the commutation of the death sentence, the court agreed and resentenced Trebec to 20 years imprisonment on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Following his conviction, Trebec stabbed at least 3 other prisoners. 10 years later, Trebec was sentenced to another 10 years and 6 months imprisonment for attempted murder and causing minor bodily harm for the 1988 and 1990 stabbings. This has been the story of Metod Trebec, one of the most infamous criminals in Slovenian history. Our story ends at the end of May 2006 when, at the age of 58, while serving his sentence at a correctional facility, Trebec died by suicide. A career criminal, he lured his victims to his homestead, killed them, burned their remains in a stove, murdering at least 5 women between 1976 and 1978. His death sentence was commuted to a long-term prison sentence, being increased by further violent assaults in prison. Do continue to listen to Detective Diaries. There will be another episode on criminal cases in Slovenia as a result of my visit to Ljubljana. As a city, I can recommend it to anyone. You will hear the story of Sebastian Abramov, which at the time was followed by everyone in the country, especially given Slovenia's global reputation for its low crime rate. We believe in authenticity. When we visit a country, we broadcast from that country. Regular listeners will have heard similar broadcasts from France, and listen out for a fantastic upcoming episode given by Adina, my Romanian colleague, of her case she handled in Switzerland and in Italy. In the meantime, do email us with any comments or requests for subject matter. We'd love to hear from you, and the email address to use is in the show notes. For now, until next time, from here in Ljubljana, na svidanja.